Warrior was just like, it's just too good. It just, for me, feels too good. And I'm hopeful
I'm fully for the combination of different combos as one button, as long as it doesn't become the main bread and butter of what's it like to play a job.
Then I would love to see them simplify it down a little, so that what's interesting is the content, not the rotation. And there are a couple dungeons like this already where there's just a lot going on. The boss is telegraphing one thing, and then there's something else going on.
No function. You couldn't look through the scope in a VR game that's designed to play in VR. You couldn't use the scope. How is this an oversight? How did they allow something like this? Anyway.
Welcome, everybody, to the Casually Hardcore Podcast, episode 19. Joining us once again, we have Thamriyell making his much-anticipated return to the show. Today, we're going to be talking about VR, Final Fantasy, gaming, all kinds of things, catching up with Tham, everything he's been doing over on his two YouTube channels. And so that is really going to be the topic of the show. We're going to talk about Google Stadia and many, many more things on this show here today. So welcome back, Tham. Man, it's so glad to have you back. What have you been up to? What's been going on in your life? What do you want to share?
Hi. Aside from switching over content from doing MMO content to VR content, basically just been grinding, really. That's about it. Just having fun in Anime Land, which is basically VR chat, and it's just been fun. I don't know. Just this giant shift, it feels crazy and weird that I went from one thing to another, but it's been pretty fun. It's been a pretty fun experience.
Yeah. So with the shift of the obviously VR chat, like what's your hardware that you're using? Because we know that there's two new VR devices coming out. The Oculus Quest, which is a wireless standalone VR device, and then you have obviously the new one. I think it's the Index from Valve. What's your thoughts? What's your takes on that? Like, what are you currently using, and what are you planning on? I don't know if you'd call the Quest an upgrade. I would love to know what your thoughts are.
Okay. Well, currently I'm using right now an HTC Vive. I got it, I believe, 2 years ago, and still been holding up really nicely. The only thing that's not been holding up are the controllers for the Vive. I had to replace those. I had to basically replace the entire pair, which is unfortunate, but Vive didn't really exactly make the best controllers in the first place. But I've been rocking that. Even been using some full body trackers for VR chat. Basically 3 hockey pucks trackers from Vive that you put one on the hip and 2 on the legs, and it tracks the hip and the leg movement of your avatar.
Man.
It's just really facility fun. It's not really used in any other game other than VR chat, but it's been pretty fun to be more expressive and have your legs move and hip move and do all kinds of crazy shenanigans and tackling each other in VR and doing some silly RP stuff with my friends on VR chat. Aside from that, my thoughts on the current VR gear, well, we could probably spend a whole day talking about it, but basically, Quest is going to be a fun mobile-like experience for VR. It's actually going to be having a lot of the games be downgraded a little bit in order to have them properly run and optimally run for the Quest. It's a standalone option, but it's not using the hardware of your PC. It's the hardware that's built in, which compared to most VR gear that's running off of your PC is not going to be as powerful. So not going to be the most optimal experience, but it's going to be good for standalone and like maybe watching Netflix in VR or something.
So watching Netflix in VR, like, talk to me about that, because is VR, like, would you play, not that 14 would be an experience that you would have in VR, but like if you're going to sit down and watch a show in VR, like on a virtual couch, is that something where, like, is that possible where you could actually like play a traditional game kind of in that VR space?
Yeah, no, I mean there are a lot of applications already as is. Like I think one of them is called VR Theater,
Mm-hmm.
or I think Steam Theater, one of the two. Basically, it puts you into an environment that looks like a theater. You can customize how everything looks visually, how the environment around you looks, how things displayed on screen look, and basically simulate yourself sitting in a theater playing a game or watching a movie.
Okay.
It's the pixel ratio in the headsets is not the greatest. So I mean, you're not gonna get the clarity that you would have if you're just watching it on,
Just a regular
on a
monitor or
phone or
TV.
regular monitor. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it does put you in a different environment. So if you want that sort of immersion, you can do that. If you want clarity, probably not the best idea.
Mm-hmm. So I want to come back to the obviously the index, because the index is like apparently the next major step. It's over $1,000 investment, and being that you already on the Valve kind of platform, I want to definitely come back to that. I do want to talk a little bit right now about, obviously we have the upcoming live letter for Final Fantasy 14 on the 24th. I don't know if you've heard, but Chris and I actually get to go out to the preview event, and we'll be out there in a couple weeks. Getting to go
Sweet.
hands-on with Shadowbringers. Also, from just a slight news update, if you haven't heard, and that way you could kind of spread the news around. For up till June 27th, you can get Heaven's Word for free. So if you were if anybody got the base package with the free game Twitch version that just expired. Or if you've just had the starter edition, you can now actually get Heaven's Word for free. So lots of Final Fantasy stuff is about to just drop on the world over the next couple of weeks. Before the show, Chris and I were actually talking about the benchmark. That's still people are like, where is it? If you compare it to Stormblood, that was right around the end of April that we got it, and obviously we're in May, so I'm wondering if that's going to be paired to it. But what are you expecting? And I also want to get Chris's thoughts on this, because we haven't tossed to him as we started the show. But what are you expecting from the live letter on the 24th? What do you want to see with that? Like you just said that you've kind of been, before the show, you've come back to 14. You're getting up early. You're doing the grind. Let's talk about 14 for a little bit. So what do you think, Tham?
We have a lot of topics there to break down, but let's start with just the live letter. Mainly, I'm just looking forward to the combat changes and seeing how the combat is going to look.
Mm-hmm.
They did say they want to try to maybe merge multiple abilities in one button while also adding more to the repertoire, so that the classes and jobs feel a lot more, more complex as we level up. So it doesn't feel like we just losing abilities, and rather be gaining abilities. I like to see what they're going to do with that, as well as the process of removing a resource bar. I believe, for example, for casters, they won't have a TP bar, and melee won't have a casting bar. I would like to see how that's going to be implemented, primarily for jobs like Paladin and Dark Knight, that primarily use both, really.
Mm-hmm.
Dark Knight, I think, uses a little bit more than Paladin. Paladin kind of has a cycle that it goes through, while Dark Knight has to juggle between both and kind of maintain mana while not really worrying about TP. So I would like to see the changes for that and how that's going to look overall.
Yeah, the jobs are going to feel a lot different, but good. I catch up.
Yeah, but aside from that, I don't really have any much of expectations from the live letter. They're probably going to just talk more about the environment, the zones, the dungeons, the raid, the maybe a little bit more detail on the alliance raids with the Nier Automata crossover. But aside from that, I just would like to see the combat, really.
Did you play Nier at all?
Yes, okay. I actually played through Route A and B. Basically, it just plays the first. It has multiple routes, multiple story lines that you go through. The first two are basically a copy of one another, but you play as either 2B or 9S, the partner for 2B. I played through those on PS4. I recently saw a sale for Nier Automata on Steam, and I decided, why not get it again or replay it again? Maybe even stream it. So I'm going to be playing through that and trying to beat it all the way through.
Okay, that's excellent. That's one of the things that's on my my backlog to finish. I want to do that before 5.1 when Nier drops on us in 14. Chris, obviously when we go out there on the here in a couple weeks, we're going to not be able to really speculate as to what people might be able to see. So now we have free reign to speculate on what we might see at the what we want to see at the live letter.
We have a podcast set to shoot every week between now and the drop of Shadowbringers. And at the time that we set that schedule up, I was like, this will be awesome to do all this speculation and guessing. And then we got invited out, and I'm like, oh no, we're going to have all these people on and we're not going to be allowed to talk about anything. So right now, we're allowed to just guess. I would like to see pacing. One of the things that this game really sets itself apart with compared to like WoW or the other successful MMOs is pacing. The combat is just at a different pace. The dungeons are at just a different pace. Talking about like the global cooldowns, talking about the number of buttons on the bar, and then the encounters themselves. So like I'm not really that worried about what class is going to be more powerful or less powerful, because we can't, I think people are going to speculate about that, but we can't know without the context of the content. So unless they're going to show us every raid, which they're not, then there's really no way to know that early on. So I just want to know kind of what class feels like. Maybe it's adding more mobility, or it's going to feel a little bit faster, or there's going to be more variation. Some classes, like namely Red Mage, can really feel very cyclical. Like once you get into your rotation, it's like, oh, this is my rotation. Next fight, same rotation. And I would love to see there be more like variety where when a boss goes into a certain stance or something like that, you're like, oh, now I need to shift what I'm doing into a totally different rotation if I want to remain optimal. So I would just love to see some complexity there. I think the term complexity kind of scares people because there's like this learning curve that you're implying. But when you look at games like Mario is a really obvious example where the number of controls are super simple, but then to master it is super complex. I would love to see a base rotation hold for classes. And it's like, hey, you're new to the game. That's totally fine. But then if you want to be optimal, if you wanted to get that savage, extreme, really get to know your class, that it's like, oh, well, there's these other things you could be doing that would really squeak a lot more output out of the same gear set.
So for that, like, is there a specific job or kind of like jobs? Because you mentioned Red Mage, but like, are there specific jobs that you're like primarily interested? Thamriyell obviously mentioned Paladin and Dark Knight. That's really where, like, from the TP MP squish, a lot of the community ends up saying like, what are they doing with them? Because like for Warrior, who gives a crap if, like, MP? Like, what is this? Like, I have a Warrior has MP. It's like, haha, 1.0 when Warriors could use it. Now it's like, whatever. So like beyond Red Mage, is there certain jobs that you're like, I really am interested in seeing where they take this?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not somebody who plays every class, and so I'm aware that like a lot of what I want to see is a little bit selfish because I don't have an equal representation across all the classes myself. I do think it's interesting to think about Paladin and Dark Knight with the TP removal because they are somebody that like utilizes both there. But I really just want to see why. So they said we don't need another healer because we have 3, but then They said we do need another tank because we have 3. And so I would like to see a little bit more about why that makes sense, because on its own it made me scratch my head. Like, we have to have a gunbreaker. You can't balance it with 3. We can't add a 4th healer or it'd be impossible to balance. And so I would love to know a little bit more about what the tanks are going to do. And this kind of, I don't really want to call it a rumor because it is kind of words they've used, but just make sure I'm understanding and it's not like a lost in translation what they mean when they say main tank, off tank. Like, are they implying that you can't bring 2 warriors to a savage raid for the next expansion? Or are they implying you can't bring 2 paladins? Like, do you have to pick one from each, or what is the intention there? I'm hoping that a little bit of the battle system reveal will help us understand what the difference in the 4 tanks is going to be, because I'm super interested in Gunbreaker.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious, especially about it, especially when we talked with Larry Czar about it, where it's like, well, if they're focusing it on main tanks and off tanks, the off tanks are going to probably end up being what really drives Savage, unless they bring in some, just horrid tank busting checks, where it's like, if you don't have, a pairing, it's really going to be hard to get past this. But for the most part, when it comes down to progression, I can see that you have the main tank concept, but the off tank concept being where you're putting it on farm, because it's all about getting as much damage as you can out of it. So it'll be neat to see where they take Gunbreaker, where they take For me, like Nam, I'm very curious about Dark Knight. I went Paladin in 2.0, Dark Knight in 3.0, came back to Paladin for a patch cycle, really until like 4.2, and then Warrior was just like, it's just too good. It just, for me, feels too good, and I'm hopeful that maybe I can bounce around, back to Dark Knight or see what they kind of do with Paladin or maybe Gunbreaker. Like it feels like every expansion I've had a different main tank. But beyond that, I am a summoner at my core. The horn is like, you can't see it, but it's always present no matter what I do. I'm a horny summoner.
The summoner doll.
So it's like I'm really excited to see that. Namely, because the question is, who knows, like the amount of work, it might be really impossible, but they probably ask the question is, do we separate summoner and scholar? Do we ultimately, that job is so unique in that when anybody asks what they should do, when they ask like, should you buy a jump potion? I'm like, you should get it for summoner scholar, because you buy one, you get a level up both of them, and then it's just a matter of then gearing the other one for the most part. So it ends up being like the most bang for your buck. And I always focus in on that no matter what first. So if they split them, and this would be like shocking because it does mean a lot of work. Like if they end up kind of splitting them out, if they do that, ultimately, like then I don't know if I'll take Summoner, Scholar, through it, because all of a sudden then it's like, what do I want to end up playing? So it's going to be interesting to see if we see some real shifting of that in the game itself. And then like anything with casters, obviously, like with Black Mage, we already talked about Summoner, and even with Red Mage, that seems ultimately where I'm going to be focusing in on to see that. Now, as it comes down to the new jobs, like I'm curious as to the playstyle. I'm sure we're going to obviously see that before we're there. That's going to be a highlight of it, but we're going to see all of them. It's going to be really neat to see how, like you were saying, Chris, like how do all of these then relate together? How is this all together being kind of integrated? And so that's where I think it's going to be interesting. They said that they're blocking over 3 hours for this live letter, and this is going to be focused. They're going to go. It's going to be epic. And so and then we'll see trailers. There'll be there's just going to be a ton of information, and the challenge is going to be, and I don't know if you remember this from last time, Tham, it's like the challenge is that there's going to be an interpretation challenge, so that as it's presented in Japanese, like, hey, check it out. Oh, did he mean this, or what do they mean? They'll eventually clarify, but then you'll also probably see they ruined my job, because in context of the epic changes, people are going to take what they hear and they're going to apply it to what they know, and not, because like there's just, I think foundationally, you can't apply the same math to the new expansion until you go hands-on with it. So there'll be people who speculate based off of the information, and then there'll be people who will be very fearful of the job. And the classic example is that they ruined White Mage before it came out. Now, I'm not a fan of the Lily system by any stretch of the imagination, but people felt like, oh, it's so underpowered, and then they go in and like, oh, it actually has a ton of power. It can output a lot of DPS. It can output a lot of healing. And then I think eventually, like, they had to do some adjustments to it anyway. But it's like as things balance and the gear goes up, there's all kinds of things like that. So I'm wondering, I think ultimately, as it relates to Dancer, Bard, and Machinist, if they're going to make Machinist fun. And I know there are Machinist mains out there who enjoyed the job. Having played Bard and Machinist, I thought Bard was clearly the fun job, and Machinist was just a soul-sucking experience that I was just like, I was glad to be done with. What do you guys? What do you think about Machinist, Sam? Like, are you a fan of it? Are you thinking it needs work?
Well, if you were to ask me back during maybe patch, what's it called, 3.1?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah, 3.1, I would have said clearly Bard. But after a while, okay, and I'm not saying that Machinist is exactly maybe the most fleshed out job out there, but when you really sit down and keep practicing and watch some guides and finally understand about how to do the opener and how the ammo works, it's kind of like Warrior, except ranged. Mm-hmm. But you have to micromanage this whole heat the whole heat gauge thing. It's not bad. I wish it was a little bit smoother, but once you kind of get a hang of it, it's actually really, really fun. Bard is reliable in my opinion because it's while you have a lot of buttons to press and a lot of upkeep, there's always like, okay, once you get on this treadmill, as long as you keep going and don't lose pacing and refresh the dots and refresh the crit buff, you're good, you're solid. With Machinist, there's nothing of that, but at the same time, you do have the constant ability to keep attacking constantly over and over and over again. It's like I said, it's kind of like Warrior. It has very simple rotation, but then when it comes to lining up the bursts, if he gets just a little bit off, it's very unsatisfying just to you, and it actually does also impact your DPS a little bit because it's one of those jobs that requires you to pull up the opener or the burst every 60 seconds every single time, and if you mess it up, you're gonna suffer. Your DPS is gonna suffer. Your teammates are gonna look at you like you don't know what you're doing. You're gonna look at yourself like you don't know what you're doing, and then nobody is happy in that situation. But if you get it right, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. Well, the Bard, it's kind of hard to mess up. Even if you mess up a little bit, just refresh dots.
It ends up it's easier to recover from any kind of mistake.
It's a safer job. It's a much safer job.
I think I would really prefer Machinist if it shifted into actually kind of a pet DPS, because you do have the turrets, but they don't actually act like a pet in that regards, and that's ended up being where my own personal preference is somebody who enjoys pet classes, aka I'm summoner, through and through. I would love to see that shift to where like the turrets were more upgraded, and they could always start off as turrets, but like maybe at some point now they can move around the field and I don't have to constantly worry about them. They have their life, I manage that. If they die, I bring them back. But literally it just is something where it's just is like, hey, this is really convenient for me, because now, like you said, like if you miss something, everything suffers, and that's just one thing that I felt like I was managing very poorly. And this is just me as a player, could have done a better job with that, and that's where I was like, man, it would be great if like I had a ranged turret and here's my close-up turret, and then it's got like it's just like where that for me would be a lot more fun and engaging if it wasn't so stationary and having to constantly being placed wherever it needed. And plus, then I think it opens it up to a lot of variety, and that's where when you talk about where does it fit in with Dancer, Machinist, and Bard, like how do these three, because the ranged melee classes, ranged DPS classes, there was that gap. It was like, okay, you got these two to balance against. Now, like all of it, and especially with TP going away, like what ultimately is one going to be focusing on, like healing over time, one focusing on MP restoring, one focusing in on what, like, yeah, how are these all going to interrelate? And that also means probably big changes for the cross roll system for me. So for me, as a controller player, after 4.4, after they brought in and said you could have all the cross roll stuff if you want to. It really kind of I had to redo so many of my hotbars because I had to make room for so many more things, and I actually brought back more macros just as a controller player to mentally manage it. And so that's where I'm like, when you talk about skill squish, all of that, like like they can't give another skill. I think we're going to see probably more upgrades, and that leads me to a question that I'd love to have y'all's thoughts on. In Stormblood, in the PvP, they added in the concept of combos, where basically the skill itself would go from one to the next to the next. We proposed this idea, back when that happened, because I love it. Especially as a controller player, I love it. What do you think about adding in that as an option for players who wanted to take that route? Some people feel like it might be too easy mode, but then like Chris was talking about, where you basically have kind of a base level, system that everybody takes part in, and then where the skill then comes in is how do you take that system, weave it in, and manage it effectively. I'm going to toss to Tham, for your perspective first, whether you engaged with PvP or not. If you need a definition of
I do. I played a ton of PvP when it was like really hot, and
when the queue times weren't 30 minutes plus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, whenever like as something new comes out for PvP, I'm just spamming it back to back because I know that eventually the queue times are just gonna be eternal, and I would never be able to get into a game. I do like what they got going on in PvP, where they combine certain combos together. It's not necessarily easy because you do have the branching out of combos for different buttons you can press as well, like with Ninja and I believe maybe with Dragoon. No, Dragoon has its own separate buttons, like how Ninja has, where you can like go from one button to two buttons. You know, maybe do like a combo of 1-1-1 or 1-2 or 1-1-2. Basically, like I don't know. I'm fully for the combination of different combos as one button, as long as it doesn't become the main bread and butter of what's it like to play a job. Because I mean, like healers won't have something like this. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But it'd be nice to have. I don't know. I like the idea of putting together multiple abilities and as one button if it makes sense. Like, I guess in context, like say for example, summoning Bahamut and using Bahamut's attack. What's it Bahamut's attack again?
Akmorn.
Akmorn. Yeah. Those, if I remember correctly, and feel free to correct me. I haven't played Summoner in a couple of days, but I believe those two things are separate buttons, right?
They are completely
Why don't they combine them?
Buttons. Absolutely.
They should just make it easy to combine them. Combos, I have no problem, especially with Dragoon combo, because Dragoon combos can be quite long. And you have to have separate buttons. You go for 1, 2, 3, or you got a combo 4, 5, 6, and then you have to maintain the damage buff as well in between that. And then your combo can actually extend to 5 buttons in total. It's a little bit crazy, but I would love to have that be narrowed down and have buttons be squished together as one singular button, if possible, for the sake of cleaning up the bars a little bit, cleaning up the hotbars. Because it doesn't make sense to have multiple abilities be on separate buttons if they correlate directly.
Well,
right?
I mean, if you know, like with Dark Knight, like Blood Price and Blood Weapon, like you can't have both up ever at the same time. Like, and that's where it ends up taking up 2 slots. And I spent a good. No, let's just not say good. I spent an stupid amount of time trying to figure out like an interesting way, and it became so complex that I just kind of then abandoned it because it wasn't something that was going to add that much value. Oh, you're in this, like boom, here's there. Because like you can set it based off your stance to what hotbar, but then essentially that only opened it up to where if there was some kind of ping delay and if you weren't in a perfect area, like you run the risk of throwing you completely off using kind of a hotbar switching macro for whatever stance. Because I was like, I don't need, because like if it's always in the same button, Blood Weapon, Blood Price. Oh, am I in grit or not? Like if they could be so kind to open up macros to be context aware, if statement macros would be amazing. But anyway,
that would be really nice.
Well,
But exactly, like if they were to combine buttons together, or at least merge buttons together as one singular button, if it makes sense contextually within the game systems of what we got going on today and in Shadowbringers, I'll be perfectly fine with that. Combos. Easy, as long as don't make it just like just spam 1 the whole time. Imagine a Bard. It's like you spam 1 and it changes like your buttons to your dots or to your crit buff just as you spam 1 without you need to change things. That might be a little bit different. If they were to put dots together, let's say that we put dots together on one singular button, you spam that same button to apply the 2 dots, no problem. Makes sense because there's still a lot more to the job than just if you can apply this 2 dots. You got the songs to play, you got the mobility, you got the utilities to provide to your party members, a little bit of minuet there and mini there, stuff like that. You can still toss things around, which would be really nice. And I mean, I don't know. I'm perfectly fine with them keeping the complexity as long as it lowers down the amount of buttons you got to press.
Chris.
I mean, I like the way Black Mage plays in PvP. I think it's a lot more about positioning and it's a lot more about being aware, especially as such a fragile class. And so, like, the idea that you could make PvE, there's a lot of button bloat, as Black Mage being the priority. I mean, that's been the primary DPS that I've played in this game. So I wouldn't mind seeing them simplify that down just a little bit. I wouldn't want to see them do it through a macro system because I think people would find a way to abuse it and we'd end up with a 1-button macro. WoW allowed that to happen back in the Burning Crusade where you had classes that literally just totally optimized down to 1 macro.
Well, like
doing
crafting in 14 now, but yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, if basically the crafting equivalent can get you through Savage, that's a problem.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I'm not drawn to DPSs in this game is because as a PS4 player, I know that people don't like to. I mean, we talk about things like terms of service, but I don't enjoy DPS without a meter. I enjoy that pressure of knowing, am I doing a good job and am I not doing a good job? And a meter is a direct measure of that. It's an objective. Here is how much damage you did, period. Your job is to do damage. Here's how much damage you did. So here's how much of your job you did. As a tank, your job is to keep everybody alive. So as long as, actually a meter is really useful for that too, because it's like, how much damage did I allow anybody else to take? And so if you remove like unavoidable things where like the boss targets somebody else, you say, okay, how much damage did I allow my party members to take from ads? How much, how quick was I to grab those? Did my healer take any damage at all that was avoidable? So I really prefer the meter. So I really struggle with DPS classes from an optimization standpoint. So if that's the direction they're going to go with this game, and that's fine, then I would love to see them simplify it down a little so that what is interesting is the content, not the rotation. And there are a couple dungeons like this already where there's just a lot going on. The boss is telegraphing one thing and then there's something else going on. You guys have to spread and then you have to stack. And that's all really intriguing. I don't need 27 buttons in my rotation. Like, give me more things to dodge. Give me more things to, if you stand in this, it ups your DPS. If you stand in this, it hurts you. And it's like, okay, so now I'm trying to run into the good and get out of the bad. And like, that's what makes more engaging content to me if we're not going to base our performance on meters. But that's my personal preference. I mean, obviously I'm going to play whatever Shadowbringers gives us. I'm not going anywhere. So they've got me. So I'm not in a very good negotiating spot when I'm like, I'm happy to pay my sub huge chunks at a time.
So there's a lot that we can kind of unpack with that, because like when we talk about, I'd love to actually dive into the meters conversation, but what I want to do is we definitely got to get Tham back, especially as whether it's for the live letter reaction or for if nothing else, like especially like when Shadowbringers is known, because like there's going to be more conversations around that. I think the DPS meters, it could be its own podcast topic in and of itself, and that's where it's just like when you brought that up, I'm like, and I'm going to have to change the title of this podcast to where we're like, the state of gaming meters. Where are my meters, man? That's what I want to know. But Tham, do you have any other thoughts on the upcoming live letter? What you want to see, detailed there before we kind of dive into our main topic? Because there's been so much going on with gaming. I want to get your perspective.
Yes, actually, two things. Right. During the Japanese Fan Fest, they apparently at some point said they're going to make White Mage DPSing easier. And I want to know what they mean by that, because I'm right now playing White Mage in, Progging. I switched to main healer for my static, and I've been playing White Mage. Aside from, Air 2 and Air 3, I think those are the abilities, I just throw Mount Fuji's with Stone 4 back to back to back. That's all it is. It just my static just calls it throw Mount Fuji's because I do ridiculous amount of damage and crit without even any effort. It's ridiculous. I'm able to keep up with DPS so well as a White Mage, and they're going to make it easier? How? Tell me more, Square, please. I want to know.
Unlimited MP.
Are they going to combine it all together on one button? So Stone 4 is going to be now Air 2 and Air 3 at the same time?
That'd be nice. Air and Stone. You start to blend abilities.
Don't encourage that. You should not encourage that.
And the range totally. It's just like
no. That's a no bueno. That's something you should not encourage at all.
Insert God mode. Like, all right.
They should not make it easier. They should make it a little bit harder, a little bit more challenging, a little bit more fun. But if they're going to make it easier, oh boy.
I think easy in the sense that when you start talking about like your various layouts, right? Like we're just talking about the combo system, etc. That a combo system and how it works in my mind isn't a one button press and win. It's that like the one button opens up the system and the hotbar. So you're like, well, this can go to this or this. So then you're like, okay, I'm going to pick this or this. But that the UI is intelligent enough to sit here and say like, okay, here's really where you want to go with it. You still have to, as the player, make the choice, the agency, and then you start building in the complexity kind of around the fights, around the content. Like, okay, are you standing in, which would be fascinating. Imagine if like White Mage had a, like, okay, I'm going to put this AoE healing thing on the ground, but like I would love to see some form of spec. Imagine if like that thing that I put on the ground either increases your DPS or increases your defense or increases whatever, and then you can sit here and say, great, now it's a matter of like, well, you got the rotation down, but are you actively utilizing the utility within the structure? Are you actually paying attention to what the heck is going on in the systems themselves? Chris, you got any final thoughts on that before White Mage goes God mode?
No. And I think it's the perfect transition, because as we talk about like adding to the experience of the game, and as we add breadth to the game, it starts to, in my mind, talk about like, well, what other PvE experiences can they give us? And that's where we start to talk about, are we going to get more limited jobs than just one at the end of every expansion? And what are they going to do with the relic system next time? And that's where, Brian, you and I have started to talk about like, well, when does it make sense to have a major change in 14? When does it make sense to have a paradigm shift? And that's honestly what I was excited to talk to Tham about today.
All right, so let's dive into it. We are on the verge of a paradigm shift, and it's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna be a shift like we saw from like the PS2 generation to the PS3, Xbox 360 generation, where there literally is just a huge like, whoa, like you kind of have that. I mean, they could always have that, but what we're talking about, we have VR. You also have more cloud-based gaming, and anytime you talk about it with anybody right now, they focus in on like, oh, people's internet right now might not be able to handle it if you're like outside of a major city, and I agree, but that's a problem that's being solved and fixed, and it's a problem that takes time, but eventually it seems like that's where the industry is going. And if they can have that lag-free experience, especially with an MMO, like especially with 14, you think about like they already said like, hey, Google Stadia, let's put 14, into the cloud. Like, yeah, it's always online anyway. It's not like if you don't have internet, you couldn't play it locally. But VR, Stadia, future of gaming, those are three like massive topics that we can break down. But I'm just curious, fam, as somebody who's doing VR chat, as somebody who's kind of in that space right now, what do you want? Like, especially as somebody who loves MMOs, like, is it 14 or is it some kind of tectonic, maybe 6.0, or something like that, where we start to see this shift in which these games that persist transition into some kind of futuristic, availability? Because I don't know, like, I think it's, as somebody who has yet to dive into VR, I think it's something that I'm always watching and kind of waiting to see, like, is there a game that's going to capture my imagination like 14, like in the VR space? Tham, I've thrown 1,000 topics at you. You pick. Dealer's choice.
Well, the common thing that I get from my friends and stuff about VR that have not, been, they're not consumers of VR, they don't have any VR games, they don't have a headset, they aren't really interested. The main reason why a lot of my friends aren't interested in VR at the moment is because there's none of that AAA experience that's like a must have with VR at the moment. There are a lot of ports like Skyrim VR and Fallout 4 VR and a bunch of other
either of those?
VR. I played Fallout 4 VR. I played it at launch, and that was a really horrible experience.
Okay.
Don't do that. Now it's a lot better. Now it's actually really manageable, really nice. I played it recently. It's pretty good. At the time, though, you couldn't even like aim down sights. If you had a scope in your gun, it didn't function. It had no function. You couldn't look through the scope in a VR game that's designed to play in VR. You couldn't use the scope. How is this an oversight? How do they allow something like this? Anyway.
They're like, print it, let's go, we'll fix it after.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit salty about that because, I mean, come on, the best come on.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there is no AAA experience or AAA game out there right now at the moment for VR that's like a must-have. Maybe if, let's say, for example, they made Portal 3 and they were like, okay, this is a VR only experience, and they made everything possibly about it require VR, like hand movements, picking things up in game directly, being able to they're coming out with the new Index controllers, right? The new Index knuckles.
Yeah, and they kind of look
They
like
act-
they kind of look like the Oculus ones. Like
yeah,
when
yeah.
I saw them, yeah.
The thing is about them, they come with this really neat new technology that actually detects the pressure if you squeeze the controllers and detects each finger individually. So let's say, for example, you want to point your finger, you actually just point with your index finger. Or if you want to open up your hand, you open up your hand. The controller still stays on your hand, but it detects each finger individually. So if you let's say for example you reach out your hand and you touch each of your fingers to your hand right now, it will detect that individual finger movement as it connects with the controller.
Okay.
And I feel like it's such a good window to open up for like a true AAA experience that just isn't out there. There's no Call of Duty. There's no even something as data as Guitar Hero that's like really innovative. That's like requires a VR right now.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like there needs to be something like this.
So what is it doing now? Like, so what is VR doing now that people should absolutely know about? Because it's like you pretty much outlined that from a AAA perspective, from that like, oh my god, there's no Halo of the Xbox. There's no Final Fantasy of that. Like you have to have this, and this is a only experience. But what is it doing now that people should know about? Like obviously you've dived
really
into
cool
it.
Concepts it's showing a lot of really cool concepts that could possibly develop into something greater in the future.
Okay.
It's not incredible right now, but it's providing a lot of conceptual data and conceptual, I guess, idea of what it could be. There's an MMO currently being developed right now for VR.
100% in VR?
It's going to be both for VR and non-VR. It's called Nostos. It's a recent game that's going to be coming out, I think, in Q3 of 2019. I've been seeing gameplay of it. It's an MMO, but it also has survival game aspects. Like you actually have to pick up an axe in game and actually chop down a tree. Take the log, chop down the tree into multiple logs, put it in your inventory, carry it over, and you can use the logs that you collected to actually build things. And the way you place things in game will actually affect the procedural world that you're in. So let's say, for example, you want to place a chair. You actually physically with your hands take the chair and put it somewhere in a world instead of how in desktop you just kind of mouse over to a location with like a little silhouette and then you left click and then it just appears there.
Okay, that's fascinating. What was that called
again?
Like
that would be Nostos.
Nostos, okay.
They got a Twitter that you can check them up on Steam as well. They got a couple of screenshots. It's still in development. It just came out in alpha. I've been watching some gameplay of it. It looks like it's going to be something really, really innovative. And the fact that they're doing a crossplay of desktop and VR will be also really cool because it gives you separate experiences and non-VR players can still participate in it and actually play it.
Yeah, especially because if it's not separate, then you can be like, well, I don't feel like VR today, but I can still participate in this world. I'm not cut off from what energy level that I feel like I'm actually placing a chair versus like, okay, I'm just here to knock out a few things. I'm very fascinated in the Index, right? It's like when I looked at the price, I was like, ooh. And then I was like,
same.
But like, so you're on, the HTC Vive right now. What does that look like? Are you somebody considering upgrading to the Index when it comes out?
To be honest, the only thing I'm getting are the controllers because they're compatible with anything Steam VR
That's
related.
So smart.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna get to the controllers, and that's about it. For me right now at the moment, I could get the Index, but do I really need a deluxe experience for VR? My headset is already pretty solid. I'm primarily using, I don't really need anything regards to the upgrade for visuals or anything except the controllers because the Vive controllers really suck. The trackpad breaks very easily, but the Index. I was hoping the Index would be like a new entry to VR that would be very consumer friendly, especially to the new consumers. Maybe be at a really nice price point, maybe like a $399 or maybe even less possibly, or at least competitive to the Vive to get folks more into be like, hey, this is actually not bad. I have a pretty solid PC. Let's get this. This actually looks like a really solid like priced headset. But instead they went into, this is a deluxe experience for people that already have VR. So folks that never tried VR, they're going to look at that, they're going to be like, okay, that's kind of cool. $1,000. No, thank you. I'm gonna just maybe I won't get that. Maybe I'll just maybe I'll save up for the PS5 or something, or the Switch or whatever. I don't know.
At $1,100, you could get a lot of different options. There's a lot of directions and content that you can go with that.
I'm very disappointed with what Valve decided to do, mostly because here's the thing: the VR market is not very expansive. They're not there's maybe like 0.003 consumers of all on Steam that even have a VR headset of any kind, whether it be an Oculus headset, a Windows Mixed Reality, or a Vive. So creating a more expensive headset is not going to encourage people to want to go and try VR. It is going to encourage the current owners of VR to upgrade if they want to.
Does then the Quest become that entry point where for people it's still at $500? Like I think it's $400 and $500 for
$399. Yeah, it's $400. The Quest is solid, but it's equivalent to, let's say, for example, you've seen the headsets where you can like put your phone in and basically that acts like a VR. Yeah, it's basically that, except with controllers. It's a standalone mobile experience for VR. I like to call it. Even for games that I play like VR Chat, I've seen effects of where the VR Chat is coming over to the Quest, but it actually has to let users know and world makers know, because everything with VR Chat is user generated. Players make the worlds that you get to visit in VR Chat, and they get to make avatars that you can use on VR Chat and wear around with your friends and stuff.
Okay.
So even right now, the limitations of the Quest are forcing a lot of the world creators to tone down the complexity of the worlds, polygon-wise, visual effects-wise, and everything, and just in general fidelity, in order to make it Quest compliant. Because the Quest is actually kind of underpowered compared to a regular VR set, with just having your laptop or your desktop power your VR experience. Typically, in a lot of laptops today, you have at least a 1060 or a 1050 graphics card of NVIDIA, NVIDIA graphics card, or equivalent card of from AMD. They can run VR no problem. You just have a VR headset, you plug it in with HDMI, USB, and done. You basically are playing VR, no problem. And your laptop or your desktop is the portal to VR. With Quest, they're removing that hardware from the external hardware that's going to be running it, and instead putting it into this compact mobile experience, but it's severely underpowered compared to what your desktop can put out. It's kind of been a little bit of a running joke within VR Chat, but it's kind of like the mobile gaming of VR. The Quest is.
Okay, well, that's kind of like you bring up that point. So, Chris, I'm gonna toss to Chris because, like, I know Chris has definitely got some questions for you as it relates to kind of like maybe AAA games and all that, because it's that, man, like, I am so interested, but you're absolutely 1,000% right. Like, whoa, that price, like, I'll wait. I think I'm hurting the industry. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so my question is, what causes the next big shift in gaming? So when we look at like the prevalence of consoles these days, where you have people using their Xbox for Netflix and all these other things, and so you have this box that can kind of be used by a whole family, and so it suddenly becomes a lot more attainable price point. And you see even like the Switch is so much more powerful than the Wii, and it's considered the underpowered hardware right now. So when we consider like things like that, what is stopping VR from taking the next jump? And maybe it isn't VR. Like the Stadia is just as revolutionary. I think something's going to cause gaming to make another step forward. VR seems like a contender, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's streaming services. But like, what is it going to take? Is it going to take just one AAA game that just happens to be the next? Like, I would say like a World of Warcraft, where it's an established genre, but it's a revolutionary game for its time, and it takes that genre to a new level. Because something has to make the jump. Like, there will have to be some set of features that Final Fantasy can't do today that a Final Fantasy 16 or whatever you want to call it could do with access to this. Do you think VR could be that thing?
I wouldn't exactly say that. I don't think VR is going to replace gaming or transcend gaming to the new age or something. VR can definitely
See, stock
push people
market prices
towards
just
that.
starting to plummet.
No. I mean, here's the thing. At the current moment, is a really a major reason to be like, okay, this is a must-have game. I need to have VR for it. Not really. Like I said, a lot of it is a lot of really cool concepts that are coming around, and maybe in 2 to 3 years, it's going to be a flawless experience. Like, um, there's an MMO that I'm playing right now, another one for VR called Orbis VR, fully VR. You need to have a VR headset to play it. Um, every swing, let's say for example, a warrior combo is an actual swing in game. Whether you swing left, right, up, or down, it actually translates into the game, and you have to do these things properly in order for it to translate into you doing abilities and combos. And while that's a really cool concept, it's still an early access game, so it's still going to be in development. 2 years from now, when it has a lot more content, a lot more classes, a lot more environment, better player models, maybe that'll be the hottest new thing to play. But we'll have to wait and see because it's still in development. Like I said, if we, let's say, hypothetically had Valve, right, with their Index, make Index or like an alternative version of Index, an affordable version, right? So makes people want to try to get it instead of paying $1,000, and then come out with things like, boom, Portal 3 only in VR. You have to have VR to have a true, incredibly immersive experience to do it. And then
Half-Life 3.
Half-Life 3. You have to have VR in order to have the greatest experience ever. And those games are like top quality games in VR. Then I feel that at that point VR would really kick off. If that was just that one game that would be like the must-have, the hot new thing, as popular as, I don't know, as, let's say hypothetically Pokemon or Mario games for the Switch, right?
Yeah.
If that was that one game or a couple of games that were like AAA top quality experience that are must-have in VR will be flying off the shelves easily.
Well, so
easily.
the other factor here is that you have the PlayStation VR experience. It's on PlayStation 4 right now. Like, does the next generation of PlayStation 5, does it launch with VR bundled into the system so that from an adoption rate perspective, literally everybody who has a PS5 has the VR headset? Just, the risk is like you run into the the Xbox like Kinect, like it's everybody's got it, and then you're like the price point is just not practical, and then eventually that all breaks down because price is like a key driving factor. But we see Borderlands 2 made for VR on PlayStation. That would be a really cool experience to see them bring it over into the PC world, right? I'm sure that's probably a part of the plan. I doubt that PlayStation probably wanted to spend that much money for them to go do that work. But then right on its heels, right this spring, you got Borderlands 3. I think Borderlands 3 would be a phenomenal VR experience. I never played the 2 one. I'm just saying that, like, with the technology, with the understanding, the only problem is that it's not coming to Steam until 6 months later. Who knows? Maybe that's what they announced. They're like, now it's to Steam and now you can play in the VR experience. But yeah, I know some salt there. Let me just toss that into some wounds out there for people. It's like, but it's like, okay. I mean, kind of reframe the question that I'm having, because I listed off like a franchise that I personally enjoy. What franchise would you want to see? When we talk about that premium, you talked about Half-Life 3, Portal 3. What franchise, like if you could pick one, what is it? You have one choice. I'm going to open with Chris. Like, what game, Chris, would it be that you're like, Brian, I am on my way to the store right now to pick up my XVR headset and I'm going to be playing this game. Will you join me?
Personally, I would jump for Zelda, but I think the market would jump for Mario. A Mario 64 type experience where you just totally turn the industry on its head. But I think it's got to be something as IP locked as a Nintendo game. I just think they have the strongest IPs out there, and it's carried through some terrible consoles. I think they can make the jump, and people would be willing to give it a shot.
Pokemon?
I don't know that Pokemon has enough features. So, like, you have to question, what is it that VR offers, right? What is it that the Stadia offers, if we're just going to laterally shift this argument? What is it that it can do that we talk about like, oh, it'd be cool, but like it's going to be cross-platform where you can play it on VR or not VR. Okay, well then it's not a VR game. And so what is it, if we're really talking about like jumping people over, making them buy that headset, then it can't be something where there's a path of least resistance and they can just do it on their existing setup.
Right.
It would have to be something that draws them. So what is something that can be designed to take full advantage of VR, full advantage of streaming, right? We're going to talk about a technology shift. It needs to be something that technology can offer, and the current technology cannot support it.
Yeah, streaming, I think it'd be a really interesting perspective to one of two things, where the people who are participating in the stream are able to step into the world as maybe like a viewer. You know, like imagine that is that you have that VR game, that VR experience, and all of a sudden you are either a participant or at least a bystander, and you can experience it in VR while it's being streamed, right? You know, because that streaming has been, when we talk about like a shift, streaming has, I think, had the biggest impact on gaming. And whether that's positive or negative, it depends on what kind of games you like. If you are somebody who absolutely does not like multiplayer games, I've got really bad news for you. If your game doesn't have a multiplayer component, most likely it's going to struggle. It's going to be something that's kind of that flash in the pan moment, and then people are going to move on with their lives. It's going, it's not going to have the staying power that a multiplayer game brings in. So what does it mean? Like, what would you say? Like, for me, obviously, I think if they can put Final Fantasy in the VR experience and give me something like really unique as a part of that, that's what would drive me in. That immediately I would go purchase that. But I know if I was going to say something, it would have to be something that I would tie into what's popular right now if there was a way to do it. Battle Royale, Fortnite VR, or Apex Legends VR, or whatever, in which that, like, when we talk about the streaming perspective, when we talk about the viewing perspective, when we talk about all of that, that's what I think would personally draw in and invest the money. You have to have, and obviously have to have that, provide the experience that you could not get in the current. Otherwise, it's not gonna take. But that's just where I would say, like, if all of a sudden you had like Ninja and these big streamers all focusing in, and like VR is the best place to play because it takes your physical skill. Like, you have that where, oh, I'm glad you're good with the keyboard and mouse, but are you good with actually crouching, and having that full body immersive experience, almost in the terms of Ready Player One? What are you guys' thoughts?
I'll let you go first, Chris.
So I just don't know that we're there yet. I wanted to talk to Tham about it because I know you've been making a move over to VR heavily as a content creator, and that's a very early adopter move. I mean, it's not the mainstream content being pushed out of gaming right now. As I see, like, I kind of picture like a whole bunch of horses racing towards the finish line of who is going to change gaming the most, and I think Google Stadia, I mean, obviously they're not the first people to say that they have streaming gaming working, and if they fail, they won't be the first ones to fail, like that. But in my mind, streaming offers developers more tools than VR at this point. So if I was gonna bet on something changing it, I would bet on, streaming services offering the ability to develop games that you no longer have to base it on hardware.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need everybody to buy an expensive console. So we can design a game that runs in 5K, and then we can up that to, 10K resolutions, literally, like, oh, and it just got pushed to 10K, everybody. And like, there's no question of like, well, how many users are we dropping? Oh my gosh, we're dropping PS3 support. Final Fantasy is going to be crushed forever. It's like, no. Your hardware is imaginary. It's totally being handled off in this cloud. Like, if I make an upgrade, it's not your problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lot more excited for where, and talking to Tham today, like, it sounds like I should continue to be more excited for where streaming can change the game in the short term, and still look at VR as like, okay, that's something that one day could be exciting, but I just don't know that we're there.
You bring up the technology perspective. Streaming, if they're able to nail that, then my mind would be able to nail VR, because then when you talk about the premiere experience, it's just then an internet connection, obviously, but then you could imagine the local compute could be lower dramatically, because then more stuff is being processed off of local, and thus you can end up probably seeing that driving prices way down. from a hardware perspective, because when that does not become a limiting factor, if the factor is like, what do you find the most comfortable headset to be? Plug in and go. And then that could end up serving, I think, a wide that market saturation, because it's interesting to see like Facebook, Google, like all of these companies have invested heavily into these different technologies because they want to be at the forefront of it. But like one of the things that was really interesting when Facebook bought Oculus, I was like, wow, like beyond gaming, when you're talking about a virtual meeting, when you're talking about all of these things that are happening, kind of a virtual office, like they want to probably try to be at the forefront of that, where gaming is driving the technology, but we're not seeing that level of investment because they haven't been able to deliver the AAA kind of experience. And so it's so interesting. It makes me wish I was rich, because if I if I had just all
This
kinds
is
of
the reason.
expendable income, it'd be like cool, like that. Like before I was a parent, before I like a family to feed, I was like, yeah, I was an early adopter. Now it's like I'm a wait and see guy. I'm like, all right, like there's certain things I'll jump in early on, and then there's most likely it's going to be like, okay, you just tell me when it's ready. Because one of the things that was fascinating about the Quest, it was like, yeah, it's a wireless. But then when you start talking about the drop, I'm like, I don't think I'm ready to take that drop in quality. And then all of a sudden I was like, well, the Index, oh, that's interesting. But then I look at the price tag and I'm just like, well, we're still in the gray area.
To be honest, the best experience I could ever offer regarding VR, in my opinion, right now, either the new Rift S, because they discontinued the Rift, sadly, the other one that they had with comfortable controllers and sensors.
Right.
Now they have just the controllers and headset. If you want to get anything from Oculus, I wouldn't recommend the Quest. I would just, if you have a good PC, you probably have a good PC, Brian.
Yeah, I could run it. Mm-hmm.
You'll probably have a VR ready PC. You never even checked the spec before, but you probably do. But easily just get, if you just want a hassle-free experience, the Oculus Rift S, just plug it in, has sensors on the headset, controllers, done. That'd be your like solid VR experience. If you want something a little bit more room scale so you can move around a lot, the Vive.
What do you recommend though? Like what do you recommend? Like I enjoy when I play games, like I have a stand sit desk, so when I stream especially, I can sit and I can stand. Mm-hmm. I have that option. What would then you recommend to me? Should I be more interested in a room scale, which now I have like the new Office. Like I have room, I have room to stand and move around. I'm not going to step on a kid's toy or a child. That's always my concern. Yeah. It's like, okay, like you put on a VR headset, like I stepped into another world, and it's like I don't want to lose track of this one. But like what would you recommend for me? Like I've played with both. I really actually enjoyed what I saw with the Vive, because it was cool to be able to kind of move around in a space. But does that stand up? Like, can I also then shift back to the sitting experience and enjoy my experience?
Here's the best part about the Vive, right? You can play it standing, you can play it sitting. Just because you have room scale set up doesn't mean you always have to move around.
Okay,
if you want to just sit in a chair or maybe sit back on that couch over there behind you, then feel free to. It's whatever is more comfortable for you. And the best part about it, right, is that there's so many tools for Steam VR right now, like advanced settings and play space mover and things like that, in order to adjust your experience. If you say, for example, you are afraid bumping into walls, you can pull up chaperone walls. So like they actually, it's like little guidelines within VR space that show how far you can go, and they will light up a little bit more whenever you're too close to the wall or something, so you don't accidentally hit anything. You can adjust all that and customize it. Yeah. You have the ability to turn on the camera on the front of it to see what's in front of you and stuff like that. So it makes it so that you don't accidentally like bump into something and break something or hit the wall. So that stuff is already being figured out by now.
So they have it. Looks like it's listed at $500 for like right now. You get the sticks, you get the room stuff, and that's and they have a Vive Cosmos. So man, they have like all of these. Okay, so there's a lot I don't know about VR.
Oh yeah, they got a couple of things coming up with Vive Cosmos. Vive Cosmos is like Oculus Rift S, where it's like has sensors on the headset. Mm-hmm. For really good room scale tracking, I would highly recommend the sensors, because you just put them in corners of the room and they track every movement.
What about they have the Vive Pro? Like, man, there's a lot about VR that I just
Vive Pro was a really cool idea, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, it's like
Vive-
review. Here's
Vive
our
was like, hey,
our VR
yeah,
review with them.
they just wanted to make a little bit better of a little bit slightly better version of the Vive, but for that price point, no. If you really want to spend $1,000, you might as well get the Index, because the Vive Pro, the whole set, even the headset itself, not worth it.
So
It just
the Index obviously has the new controller kind of thing that you're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
beyond more power, like what is it that like who is that for? Like, obviously that's probably for the upgrade. That's not for the I guess for the hobbyist.
I mean, if somebody was, already interested in VR as is and just wanted to go ahead and just, shell out the money for it to get that high def deluxe experience for VR, yeah, you can. Because the cool part about the headset, I mean, if you really look at the specs, it's actually really nice. High field of view. You can go up to 144 hertz, which means you have a smoother experience looking left and right.
I don't even have a monitor that does that yet, so that would be like...
Yeah. I have a monitor for that. It's so buttery smooth. It's so buttery smooth. My current Vive right now is set to 90 hertz, which is really, really comfortable for looking around games. Basically, your game's running at 90 FPS. It's a very comfortable, very buttery smooth experience. But 144 hertz in a headset, that would be really, really buttery smooth. That'd be
so
excellent.
I'll go get another job.
But I mean, the biggest part about VR is the interaction. That's my favorite part about it. Whether it be VR chat or whether it be just games where you can pick up stuff. The way that you can pick things up and move things around, and the way it responds to your movement and stuff directly without like a keyboard input. It's something absolutely amazing. Something that makes me like, let's say, for example, I'm playing a VR version of already a desktop game. It makes me appreciate that game more because I'm actually directly contributing to it, and there's direct input from my hand-eye coordination. Y'all heard of Pavlov, right? It's basically like CSGO in VR.
Okay.
I cannot go back to CSGO ever again. Pavlov has ruined CSGO for me to the point where I will always play Pavlov over CSGO. The fact that you can actually aim down sights with your own hands directly, reload the weapon with your own hands as fast as you need to, and everything. It's absolutely amazing. I'll have to send you all a video by Cropcat. They have really cool videos they make every now and then for some really revolutionary things happening within the game world. They made a really good video about comparison between CSGO and Pavlov. The amount of interaction that you can do with both your hands in Pavlov completely blows CSGO out of the water. It's absolutely insane. Like, it's hard to describe. See, here's the thing: the problem with VR, it's hard to describe it to people that never tried VR. But imagine but imagine this: using your hand, using your actual hands on controllers, or maybe let's say, for example, the knuckle controllers that strap on your hands that detect your finger movements, reaching out and grabbing something with your hands and seeing it be grabbed in VR, throwing it, seeing it be thrown, or maybe bounce and stuff like that. The interaction behind it is probably the biggest selling point behind VR. How everything directly interacts with your movement, real-time movement, and translates into this VR space. It's a very, very immersive experience. And in some ways, it makes people not want to leave. We actually have kind of a thing happening on VR chat where there's a lot more interaction in VR chat than just, hand movement.
Yeah.
You actually get to interact with folks. It's like an entire social platform.
Right.
You get to meet friends, get to meet people across the world. They could be on the whole other side of the world from you. I met so many
pour
amazing
yourself
friends.
a real world drink while in VR.
Yeah,
Socialize.
actually, there are a lot of social gatherings where people would get together in VR chat and they would just drink together and actually have parties in VR. It happens actually very regularly.
This is gonna be a Brave New World in 10 years, guys.
It's a real cool social gathering because you get to hang out with people from, like, I literally just went to an event not long ago. I hung out with some folks from West Coast, East Coast, some folks in Germany, Australia, Italy, Norway, Sweden. All of those folks gathered together, just hanging out together, partying in VR. It's one of the coolest social experiences ever because it's like it connects folks together because we're all on different parts of the world.
Right.
But in VR and in VR chat, we're able to interact and socialize and play beer pong together and just drink together and just have interactions, joke around and stuff, and just have the silliest of time. The social aspect of VR chat is probably the biggest driving point behind it, and people see that on content, people see that on streams and videos, and they say, I want to be part of that. I want to, join that. I want to be part of that social interaction. I want to be able to wave to friends, be able to, play beer pong or whatever, or do some sort of gestures or create avatars or check out worlds. Even as simple as I want to actually reach out and headbutt my friend that has a really cute avatar. VR chat has a very interesting and weeby culture, but that's the best part about it, because to somebody that never played it, it's completely strange. Be able to headbutt your friends and stuff, right? Everybody will be like, okay, that's a little bit weird. What are you doing? But it's such a simple interaction that goes a long way for somebody who plays VR chat. I don't know. It's such a unique experience that's only for VR chat, and something you can really experience only in VR.
Okay. All right.
Now, there have been some people that have been getting really intricate in VR, which I highly support. That's actually the biggest reason why folks want to get into VR. They see all these VR dancers, right? Okay. They get the full body trackers, they get a hip tracker, leg trackers, and they just play music out of the mics and they dance. They straight up dance. Different variety of dancers come and bring in the IRL skill into VR, showing off their skill as these avatars.
And then Fortnite's just like taking that data and saying, and now we're going to sell that as a dance. Oh my God. Thanks, guys. Thanks for your effort. We'll take the money. Oh my goodness.
Well, hopefully they get royalties.
No, legally, I think that's been ruled that it's not. Like they can't. All the lawsuits have been tossed out that you can't copyright a specific move. Like you can copyright like a choreographed piece of work, but like the floss and whatever like that. That's like nope. That's just like a step. You can't copyright the grapevine. It's like okay, like we're good. Oh my goodness! All right, Chris. I want to drop to you to final thoughts.
Sorry I took so long. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good, dude. I love hearing from it. You literally sold me on it. I just have to figure out how to pay for it, and that's maybe this fall. Maybe that's something that happens this fall. Hey. We'll have to see. Anyway, sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
No, I think that Tham streams are something that I find myself in from time to time, and it's a very like jarring experience. Like you don't know what to expect. Very. So different. And so I just sit there and kind of lurk. I don't really understand what's going on. I would love to see what that community would do with more like AAA games and more like, I guess, traditional avenues of entertainment that would kind of invite people in, like, okay, maybe you just go watch some VR streams from time to time. And then next thing you know, it's like, oh, on Craigslist, this guy's selling his VR headset for, next to nothing. Well, I'll try it. And then next thing you know, you're that guy that's like looking at the next Valve $1,000 upgrade. I'm excited about where VR can go. I don't know that it's ready to go mainstream, but I do think it's an interesting topic, and I do think that I appreciate knowing kind of Tham's thoughts on that, especially as we come up on Shadowbringers when we start to talk about like, could games like this make it into VR? So sounds like your answer is maybe not yet, but there could be a day.
Not yet, but it's coming along. Like I said, my biggest point about VR, it's a proof of concept. Basically, it's like, this is what it could be, and it's getting there. It's not fully there yet, but it's getting there, so don't worry. It's gonna come there. We're gonna have, like I said, Half-Life 3 VR, Portal 3 VR, done deal.
Drop the mic, walk off stage.
Sold immediately. If not for VR chat, people will be sold for those two games easily.
All right, Tham. Beyond that, any other final thoughts from you?
Final thoughts. Well, I gotta say, we didn't really discuss a lot about Final Fantasy 14. Though
I thought we did. I thought we ended up.
I mean, we did, yeah, but I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, we got to get you back on the show for freaking sure, because it's like there's so much that, and especially news-wise, it's just going to be about to be dropping on people.
Yeah, and y'all gotta have the inner knowledge now. So,
it's going to be difficult whenever it's like, because we'll be under embargo, so it's like there'll be like what we can't actually talk about, and then what can we speculate on? And it's like at some point it's like, well, I can't speculate on any of this because it's like I literally know what it is, and I don't want to be like, is it that they're introducing, a Beastmaster? No. It's like you knew that. It's like you're just giving it. Like I don't want to give people false hope. Things like that. So the Shadowbringers drops on early access June 28th. We are 8 weeks away from Shadowbringers. This is going to be, I think, a very speedy thing. I'm assuming that they're going to drop the benchmark on us around the time of the live letter, but maybe that could happen at any point because like last time it happened in April, at the end of April, and now we're looking at it's May, and then the end of May is really when the live letter is on the 24th. Like is that then? I don't know. Like it's going to be neat to see how our PCs perform as well. And then being able to kind of play with the Viera and the Ronso. That's what I'm calling them, Hrothgar or whatever. Are you gonna be doing a race change?
I might change to Bunny Race for like a month, but I gotta say, Miqo'te all the way. Literally Miqo'te all the way. My VR chat avatar is a Miqo'te. I literally customized my VR chat avatar after a Miqo'te from Final Fantasy 14 because I wanted to bring something from that universe into VR chat. Yeah. I can't let go of 14.
Gotcha. Absolutely. All right. So, Tham, where can people find you? Where can people follow you? What you working on? What you got coming up? Busy, more VR chat. Absolutely. But tell people where you are and where they can find you.
Well, you can find me over on Thamriyell VR on YouTube. The Thamriyell channel with MMO content is basically equivalent to the Mojave Desert from Fallout New Vegas, as in it's empty, dry, and there's nothing going on there. So if you want to check out any content that I do, it's going to be definitely on the Thamriyell VR channel. You can find me on Twitter at Thamriyell right there, as you can see right down the stream. Twitch is Thamriyell VR as well, or maybe Thamriyell. I'm not sure. What's my Twitch again?
I'll be sure to include all the links. I think it's Thamriyell VR.
Yeah, I think it's Thamriyell VR. Yeah, it's twitch.tv/Thamriyell VR. If you're interested in any sort of VR related or VR chat related content, feel free to check it out. However, I know it's going to be a little bit jarring. Granted, I'm not doing 14 anymore. I still get comments sometimes, people wondering, it's like, hey, you're going to be doing 14 again? I'm like, I kind of want to, but I got this whole VR thing. I got to edit videos and streams. And I wish I had more time in a day. I really wish. Right. I would love to run both channels, but I would need to extend every single day to 48 hours at least if I were to want to do both.
To get everything done that you want done, absolutely.
Chris, there's only time for so much.
Chris, where can people find you?
We've been streaming a lot more. We've been streaming on Monday nights here on YouTube and on Twitch when both of us are live. And then I've been trying to grab lunch streams when I have time. And then we have been putting out YouTube videos at like a crazy rate. It's been like 2 a day. So just keep it going.
Just keep it going. So with that, guys, I do want to do a shout out to chat for hanging out with us. I want to say thanks to Mr. Slam for the 110 bits. I want to say thanks to Coffee, to Beckstar, to Andy, to Shrapnel, to Matthew, to Norman, to Mr. 3 Machine, Ekrasandu, Fernout, Nashi, Morga Live twice with the host Nashi, Pickadude, John, Real Dead Gamer, and Chad SV for the subs, for the follows, for the cheers, for the chat. You guys are phenomenal. You can check out this podcast over on our YouTube page, WorkToGame, and that's where you can find us there. And then also you can find our podcast on iTunes and wherever podcasts are distributed at WorkToGame. You can find us, search us there. So we've got all of that. We've, like Chris said, we've got podcasts scheduled every week, all the way right now up to the release of Shadowbringers. We're bringing on lots of different content creators. Some some you might not have yet heard of, but a lot of really cool things are going to be happening over the next couple of weeks. Literally just so thrilled. We thank Tham for making time out of his busy schedule, especially when he talks about needing 48 hours. Like, can we steal an hour and a half of your of that time to come and talk to us about the future of video games? We're going to have to get him back on more frequently, especially if we're literally jumping around and doing this every week. We're talking, the plan is to take the podcast and turn it into a weekly podcast. There's so much that I think a lot of people have really responded to, and we really love making it. And then thanks Nashi for the 200 bit cheer right there, taking first place for that. So that's pretty much it. I, as typical, WorkToGame, I have to get back to work at this point. So that's what I'm going to be diving into for this afternoon. For WorkToGame, my name is Brian.
My name's Chris.
My name is Thamriyell.
Thank you so much for tuning in, live or in the archive. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
Hey, it's me. It's been a while since I talked to you guys directly this way, but don't tell anybody. We've got even more epic content planned for this channel. The response has been incredible. We hope to see you. If you're new, hit subscribe, leave us a comment. I'd like to talk to you more about video games. I can't seem to speak my language. All right.